Ester 1. And it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, that Ahasuerus reigned from India to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. That in those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in the fortress of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a banquet for all his princes and his servants, so that the power of Persia and Media and the nobles and princes of the provinces were before him, to show the riches of the glory of his kingdom, and the splendor of his excellent greatness, for many days, even 180 days. And when those days were over, the king made a banquet for all the people who were in the fortress of Susa, from the greatest to the least, for 7 days, in the courtyard of the garden of the royal palace. The tapestries were of white, green, and sky-blue cloth, hung with cords of fine linen and purple, and rings of silver, and pillars of marble, the beds of gold and silver, on a pavement of red, and blue, and white, and black marble. And people drank from golden cups, and the cups were different from one another, and there was much royal wine, according to the king's generosity. And drinking was by law, without constraint, because the king had expressly commanded all the officials of his house to do according to the will of each one. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet to the women in the royal house of King Ahasuerus. And on the 7th day, when the king's heart was glad of wine, she sent to Momin, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar and Carcass, the 7 chamberlains who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus. Let them introduce Queen Vashti into the presence of the king, with the royal crown, to show the people and princes her beauty, because she was beautiful to look at. But Queen Vashti refused to come according to the king's word, through the chamberlains, so the king was very angry, and his wrath was kindled in him. Then she asked the king of the wise men who understood the times, because this is how the king's affairs were handled in the presence of all who knew the law and right. And those closest to him were Carsenna, Shethar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of the Persians and the Medes, who saw the face of the king, and sat as rulers in the kingdom. What, according to the law, should be done to Queen Vashti, for not having obeyed the order of King Ahasuerus, through the chamberlains? Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the princes, not only against the king has Queen Vashti sinned, but also against all the princes, and against all the people that are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the news of what the queen has done will reach all the women, so that in their eyes they will despise their husbands when they hear it said, King Ahasuerus ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she did not come. And on this very day the ladies of Persia and Media, hearing what the queen did, will say the same to all the king's princes, and so there will be much contempt and indignation. If it seems good to the king, let a royal edict come out from him, and write it in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, and not revoke it, namely, that Vashti no longer enters the presence of King Ahasuerus, and the king gives her kingdom to another who is better than her. And when the commandment is heard, which the king will decree throughout his kingdom, for it is great, all women will give honor to their husbands, from the greatest to the youngest. And these words seemed good in the eyes of the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to every province according to their script, and to every people according to their language, that every man should be master in his own house, and that he should speak according to the language of his people. Ester 2. When these things were over, and the wrath of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti, and what he had done, and what had been decreed concerning him. Then the king's servants who ministered to him said, Let virgin and beautiful girls be sought for the king. And the king shall place officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, and they shall gather all the virgin and beautiful maidens into the fortress of Susa, into the women's house, under the care of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, guardian of the women, and give them their ornaments. And the girl who looks good in the king's eyes, reign in Vashti's place. And this seemed good in the king's eyes, and he did so. Then there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who was transported from Jerusalem, with the captives who were carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, who had transported Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He had created Hadassah, which is Esther, his uncle's daughter, because he had neither father nor mother, and she was a young woman, beautiful in presence and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her for his daughter. It happened that, when the king's command and his law were published, and many young women gathered in the fortress of Susa, in the care of Haggai, they also took Esther to the king's house, under the custody of Haggai, guardian of the women. And the girl appeared beautiful in his eyes, and found favor with him, therefore she hastened to give him her ornaments, and her portions, as well as to give him 7 respectable girls from the king's house, and he made her pass with her girls to the best place in the women's house. Esther, however, did not declare her people and her relatives, because Mordecai had ordered her not to declare them. And Mordecai walked every day in front of the court of the women's house, to find out how Esther was doing, and what would happen to her. And when the turn came for each girl to come to King Ahasuerus, after it had been done to her according to the law of women, for 12 months, for in this way the days of her purifications were fulfilled, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices, and with things for the purification of women. In this way, then, the girl came to the king, she was given everything she wanted, to take with her from the women's house to the king's house. In the afternoon she entered, and in the morning she returned to the women's second house, under the care of Xerxes, the king's chamberlain, guardian of the concubines. She no longer returned to the king, unless the king desired her, and she was called by her name. Now when the turn of Esther, daughter of Abihail, uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, came to go to the king, she asked for nothing, except what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, guardian of the women, said. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus, to his royal house, in the 10th month, which is the month of Taves, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther more than all women, and obtained grace and favor before him more than all virgins, and he put the royal crown on her head, and made her queen in Vashti's place. Then the king gave a great feast to all his princes and his servants. It was Esther's banquet, and he gave relief to the provinces, and made gifts according to the king's generosity. And when the virgins came together the second time, Mordecai sat at the king's gate. Esther, however, did not declare her relatives and her people, as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther fulfilled Mordecai's command, as when he created her. In those days, as Mordecai sat at the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, from the guards of the gate, Bigtan and Teresh, were greatly indignant, and sought to attack King Ahasuerus. And this came to Mordecai's knowledge, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. And the matter was inquired into, and it was discovered, and they were both hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the chronicles before the king. Esther 3. After these things King Ahasuerus magnified Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and exalted him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants, who were at the king's gate, bowed themselves and prostrated themselves before Haman, for thus had the king commanded concerning him, but Mordecai did not bow down or prostrate himself. Then the king's servants, who were at the king's gate, said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's commandment?" So it came to pass, when they told him this day after day, and he did not listen to them, that they told Haman, to see whether the words of Mordecai would stand, because he had declared to them that he was a Jew. Now when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or prostrate himself before him, Haman was filled with wrath. However, he had little reason, in his purposes, to lay his hands only on Mordecai, because they had declared to him what people Mordecai was from. Haman therefore sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the 1st month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, that is, the lot, was cast before Haman, for every day, and for every month, until the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. And Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a people scattered and divided among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose laws are different from the laws of all the people, and who do not keep the king's laws. That's why it doesn't suit the king to let him stay. If it seems good to the king, decree that they be killed, and I will put into the hands of those who do the work 10,000 talents of silver, that they may enter into the king's treasuries." Then the king took the ring from his hand, and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, an Agagite, enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "This silver is given to you as well as to the people, to do with them whatever seems good in your eyes." Then they called the king's clerks in the 1st month, on the 13th day of the same, and, according to all that Haman commanded, they wrote to the king's princes, and to the governors who were over every province, and to the leaders of every people, to every province according to its writing, and to every people according to their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus it was written, and with the king's ring it was sealed. And the letters were sent by post to all the king's provinces, so that they would destroy, kill and destroy all the Jews, from young to old, children and women, on the same day, on the 13th day of the month, 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the order that determined the dissemination of the law in each province was sent to all people, so that they would be prepared for that day. The couriers therefore, impelled by the word of the king, went out, and the law was proclaimed in the fortress of Susa. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was in confusion. Esther 4. When Mordecai heard all that had happened, he tore his clothes, and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried out with a great and bitter cry. And he came to the king's gate, for no one clothed in sackcloth could enter the king's gate. And in all the provinces where the word of the king and his law reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, and weeping, and lamentation, and many were lying in sackcloth and in ashes. Then Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told her, whereupon the queen was greatly grieved, and she sent clothes to clothe Mordecai, and to take off his sackcloth, but he did not accept them. Then Esther called Hadda, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to serve her, and gave him orders to go to Mordecai, to find out what this was and why. And when Hadda went out to Mordecai, into the city square, which was before the king's gate, Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, as also the exact sum of the money, which Haman said he would give to the king's treasuries, for the Jews, to destroy them. He also gave him the copy of the written law, which was published in Susa, to destroy them, so that he could show it to Esther and let her know, and to order him to go to the king, and ask and plead with him in his presence for his people. So Hadda came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hadda, telling him to say to Mordecai, all the king's servants, and the people of the king's provinces, know well that every man or woman who comes to the king in the inner court, without being called, there is but one sentence, that of death, unless the king extends it to he is the golden scepter, that he may live, and in these 30 days I have not been called to go to the king. And they told Mordecai the words of Esther. Then Mordecai commanded them to answer Esther, do not imagine in your heart that, because you are in the king's house, you alone will escape among all the Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, help and deliverance will come to the Jews from another side, but you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether for such a time as this thou hast arrived in this kingdom? Then Esther told them to say again to Mordecai, go, gather together all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, neither day nor night, and I and my maidservants will also fast in this way. And so I will go to the king, even if it is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went, and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and leave a comment.